The Honourable Joe Goodhue.
On behalf of the Minister of Social Housing, Mr Speaker, I move that the bills divided from the Social Housing Reform, Flexible Purchasing and Remedial Matters Bill be now read a third time. Mr Speaker, I want to use this opportunity to reiterate how these four bills improve the lives of vulnerable New Zealanders by providing them with social housing that meets their needs. The Housing Restructuring and Tenancy Matters Social Housing Reform Amendment Bill is all about increasing the supply and quality of social housing and growing the community housing sector. There are currently 30 registered community housing providers who have 213 houses where tenants are receiving the income-related rent subsidy. They deliver niche services that meet the diverse needs of social housing tenants, and we want them to grow, and this legislation will help them do that. This bill gives Ministry of Social Development flexibility in the way it enters agreements with social housing providers. It creates a ministerial direction power to allow the Minister of Social Housing, in consultation with other housing ministers, to authorise the Ministry of Social Development to enter into tailored agreements to purchase social housing. These new tailored agreements will enable MSD to look at contracts with tenants in mind and look for ways to get better housing services and better provision of social housing. The current income-related rent subsidy will remain, but the new tailored agreements will now provide greater flexibility. We've been talking to the community housing sector, and they've told us loud and clear that the income-related rent subsidy alone is not sufficient to encourage community housing providers to supply properties in all circumstances. They want to be able to enter into different types of agreements, including into long-term fixed-price contracts with the government. Long-term contracts will give them a guaranteed income they can use to borrow against to build or buy houses. The practice for far too many decades was that a tenant would be put in a state house, left there and forgotten. We recognise that some social housing tenants need extra help. We want to make sure that tenants' needs are met, and as they change over time, we want to provide the right housing and the right services to respond to those needs. I firmly believe that local providers understand their people's needs best, and I think that these tailored agreements will give them a greater role in determining what is best for tenants. To be clear, nothing in this bill will change tenants' eligibility for the income-related rent subsidy or how much they will have to pay in rent. It's crucial that we pass this legislation today so that we can work more effectively with the sector towards an additional 3,000 places in the next 3 years. Support an Auckland initiative that will see another 300 social housing places delivered by community housing providers. This will help vulnerable New Zealanders into quality accommodation. In the future, as we work with the sector, we'll establish different types of agreements worth exploring that will be beneficial to both tenants and providers. These changes are going to make MSD a smarter and more sophisticated purchaser of social housing. It will also enable MSD to more effectively manage the social housing spend and purchase quality social housing for vulnerable people. The three other bills, the Housing Corporation Social Housing Reform Amendment Bill, the KiwiSaver Home Start Amendment Bill, and the Taxation Social Housing Reform Bill, all make minor but important changes. The first ensures that payments for residential social housing provision under these agreements are GST exempt, consistent with the current treatment for residential rental payments. The second clarifies that Housing New Zealand is no longer required to provide policy advice to ministers. That has been the role of MB for some time. The final one ensures that any prior period of membership in a complying superannuation fund should count towards the 3-year eligibility period when the member transfers to KiwiSaver. This means that more KiwiSaver members have access to their savings to assist with the purchase of a first home. I commend these bills to the House.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr Speaker.
Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.